Good morning, everyone. I'm Cherry Kubota, professor at The Ohio State University. Welcome to Indoor Ag Science Café, April. I hope your area is warmer than we have right now. It's a kind of chilly morning and we had a little frost and sort of, it's toward the end of April. Right. So anyway, spring is here for sure. So I hope you have really good day today. So anyway, let's start today's program. So this is OptimIA's supported USDA funded program, outreach program for us to learn and share information, science-based information to advance the indoor vertical farm agriculture. So anyway, so we are doing monthly, and then today we're gonna have two speakers from Michigan State University. And then next month, May, originally scheduled, I believe it was 14th and now 24th, 1 week later, Murakachira University of Arizona talking about CFD 101. So this is essential engineering tool to analyze the airflow in the indoor space. And then June 7th, we have another indoor farming technology showcase. So you wanna look forward to that. So a little bit of advertisements. My university has a center called Ohio Controlled Environment Agriculture Center, and we are organizing this symposium, not necessarily just focusing on indoor farming, but more like a greenhouse hydroponics under controlled environment, but advancement of microbial technologies for controlled environment agriculture, July 20th. So one day after Cultivate. So if you're coming to Columbus anyway, this is really great opportunity to listen to the experts and then learn the research projects going on in Ohio State. So that, and then Nadia Saba, Dr. Greenhouse is doing another workshop focusing on HVAC foundationals for indoor plant environments. And I believe this is, you know what, I didn't put the date, but the link is there. And then this is in the calendar in our website and then also announcement. Sorry, Nadia, if you are here, you can type the date. Or Kari, you can do that for me. I thought I did, but sorry about that. But this is really good one, so I recommend. Oops, stop it. One more thing, AgTech Innovation Summit, May 17 and May 18. So it's coming up soon. Our project director, Dr. Eric Ranko, is going to be in this event. So check out. So that's website to participate, to talk about different aspects of indoor farming. The last advertisement. So OptimIA group launched this OptimIA University, which is basic knowledge of indoor farming, and contents available from our OptimIA website. So it's under the Knowledge Center, but direct link is this optimiauniversity.org. We have many lectures coming up. And right now, I think we have 6 or 7 lectures already available. So if you want to have your colleagues or workers to learn some of the basics, or you want to enrich the knowledge of some of the areas you are not really familiar with, this is a really good starting materials to learn the basics. So I highly recommend, and we're going to put more lectures over the next couple of months. So look forward to that. With that, I'd like to introduce 2 special speakers out of OptimIA Group, Dr. Chris Peterson, and then also Simone Valle de Souza from Michigan State University. And then the title is Consumer Varieties in the Market for Indoor Agriculture Produce Leafy Greens. So I'm going to stop sharing and then have Simone share.
Thank you, Cherry. Let me share. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. We, the OptimIA economics team, will be presenting today the results from two experiments that we extracted from a consumer survey. So Chris Peterson and I will take turns. We'll be presenting each part of this analysis. This work was done by Joseph Seong, who is working with us. In April, Ethnos comes as a special guest to the economics team, contributing with her econometrics expertise. And so we call it Consumer Varieties in the market for indoor agriculture produced leafy greens. And Chris, I'll pass the baton to you to start presenting the overall idea of this analysis today and results from the first experiment.
Okay, thank you, Simone. Essentially, one of the issues in the economic modeling of profitability for your industry, we have to look at the revenue side of equation. And so when we think about that, you folks who are on the more technical side, you think about plant varieties. We think about varieties of consumers. And so there were two fundamental questions. One is, what attitudes do consumers have about indoor agriculture? And are they willing to pay for IA leafy green attributes? There are two very closely related questions that have to do with the ability to enhance revenue for firms in this industry. So our economics team did an online survey during July and August of last year. We got a representative sample of over 2,000 responses from US leafy green consumers. And so the segmentations you're going to see today are based on a very strong representative sample. And all of the items we're talking about have real statistical significance. So our analysis shows that consumers can be divided into at least two market segmentations. One of the segmentations is based on consumer attitudes about indoor agriculture. And the results of that analysis create four very interesting consumer groups or consumer segments: IA skeptical, IA accepting, IA supportive, and IA engaged. And we'll talk about what those categories mean in a few minutes. Then we did a second market segmentation that arises from what's called a decision choice experiment about consumer willingness to pay for leafy green attributes. And the segments we found here are quality seekers, price conscious, and focus practicals. And again, we'll talk about the characteristics of these groups. And the ultimate question really here is, do consumer attitudes about IA translate into their willingness to pay for IA produce? And so the last slide of the presentation today will take on those questions. Simone, next slide. Okay, so we had 8 questions on this survey that were essentially 5-point Likert scales running from strongly agree to strongly disagree about IA. And you see them laid out on this slide. IA makes it possible to grow higher quality leafy greens. It employs less labor. It's easier to produce leafy greens locally. It's less harmful to the environment. In the future, it will be a mainstream production method. All of those are positive statements about the attributes of IA as an industry. Then we put in one negative attribute, is indoor agriculture artificial and unnatural. And then we wanted to pick up how much prior knowledge did our consumers have about IA. And the ultimate question here was, knowing what they know about IA, are they willing to consume leafy greens in this type of farm? So these are the statements that created the segmentation or market segments that we're about to see. Next slide. So the first group, 31% of the population, are IA skeptical. They are the least likely of the four groups to consume IA produce, but they do feel they have a moderate level of knowledge upon which to base their decisions. They're slightly negative towards each of those 5 potential benefits, and they lean toward viewing IA as artificial and unnatural. In terms of demographics, the group tends to be younger, less educated, lower income, and more rural. And their top demands for leafy greens generally, freshness and taste comes first, and then price follows a somewhat distant third. 74% of them buy their leafy greens at supermarkets. Second segment, IA accepting, 25% of the population that we surveyed. Now they're likely to consume IA produce, but by their own admission, they are the least knowledgeable about IA. They're just slightly positive towards IA's benefits, and they're neutral in terms of the artificiality or unnaturalness of IA. Again, demographics, older, female, well-educated, less diverse, and suburban. And again, freshness and taste top the list of general attributes they want from leafy greens, but 60% of the group clearly said price was critical. And so this particular group, by the statement, are the highest in terms of being price sensitive, and 82% buy their leafy greens at supermarkets. Segment 3, 30% of the population, we've given the label IA supportive. They're actually highly likely to consume IA produce, and they view themselves as having quite a high level of knowledge about IA. They're strongly positive about IA's potential benefits, while they don't see IA as artificial and unnatural. Again, demographic trends, older, well-educated, less diverse, and higher incomes. Again, freshness comes in as the very tippity top attribute, followed by taste, price, and consistent quality. And again, a very high percent of these folks, 81%, buy their leafy greens in supermarkets. The fourth and final segment, it's only 14% of the population, but these are the folks that really like or get geeked almost by IA, and so we've called them IA engaged. They're the most likely to consume IA produce. They have the highest IA knowledge. They are very positive towards IA benefits. And interestingly enough, they view IA as artificial and unnatural in terms of the level of technology, but for them, it is actually a positive attribute, not a negative one. Again, demographic trends, younger male, higher education, they're the most diverse group, and they are urban. 42% eat leafy greens daily, which is twice the rate of any of the other three segments. And they have a whole list of attributes that they view as important. Freshness, again, very high, but notice that price falls off this list. And interestingly enough, only 62% of them buy at supermarkets, whereas a third of them use a lot of other more modern shopping methods of subscription delivery services, gourmet food stores, natural groceries stores, etc. So here are these four interesting segments, and we're going to bring them up here on one slide. And I think there are some really good news here for the industry, and that is we have a lot of people out there who believe they know a lot about the industry, and we were a little surprised. You put the 14% engaged and 30% supportive, that's 44% together. That's very positive. Now, on the other hand, the skepticals also think they have a moderate amount of knowledge, and that puts them, but they aren't as excited about the industry and its products. The accepting are the most price sensitive, we believe, of the various groups, but there is still a lot to work with in terms of the potential marketing strategies of any of the firms in the industry. You look at the IA engaged, and certainly 14% of the population, there are some real sort of niche marketing strategies that would work very well for smaller firms. When you open it up to some of the other categories here to broaden the base, then you have to become, I think, more careful to educate people about the industry and the benefits that it brings. That's segmentation number one. Now we'll turn to segmentation number two.
Thank you, Chris. Now I will be talking about the experiment, or let's put it the other way, the data that was collected from the same survey, but another experiment, which was the choice experiment. In this experiment, we simulate a real-life purchasing scenario. So first we presented the three images, which, by the way, was presented even before the analysis that Chris just presented. So we show these three images here on the left that represent the three types of production system that we would be referring to in the choice experiment. Then we asked the survey respondents to choose the combination of the various attributes shown in different levels, or alternatively, just choose the no buy option. And each of these respondents is given 6 choices, and which means they are presented with 6 different scenarios that combine the type of production system, either indoor agriculture, farm, field, or greenhouse grown, and then the levels of the attributes we chose: taste, freshness, food safety, and nutrient levels. For this experiment, we took the prices from 2 sources. Field farmed lettuce prices were taken from the USDA commodity reports, while the indoor agriculture and greenhouse lettuce grown prices were actually estimated from an online survey of what is available, and we decided that we found that the most used size of package was 4.5 ounces, so that's what we chose for the experiment. The other attributes were given 3 levels: okay, good, and very good, which was a loose representation of below average, average, and above average. The last one, food safety, takes only the option with and without a label. And then from this data, we run the analysis, but we observed that there was heterogeneity in the data, and we found 3 significantly different groups of consumers. So now we have 3 groups of consumers: quality seekers, the price conscious, and the focused practicals. The results, first, okay, this is the summary of our results for the willingness to pay, which is presented here as the mean dollar value estimated for each attribute when purchasing 4.5 ounces of lettuce. They represent approximately the maximum price individuals are willing to pay for these attributes. Now, if you look at the first column on the left, we have the full sample. So the full sample tells us the story at the aggregate level, all responses together. And it shows a preference, a higher willingness to pay for field farming. And it's a positive value as well for attributes. But however, we can see at the aggregate level, the lowest value here was attributed to nutrient level. And when I refer to values, it's the actual coefficient. Like I said, these are dollar figures. But results were not significant at the aggregate level. So, like I said, we tested for heterogeneity using latent class models. And in fact, a clear distinction was observed. Then we have classes 1, 2, and 3 here. And we named these classes based on what this data is telling us. But instead of going through the table, let's just push this table aside and go for the overall conclusions from what all these numbers were telling us. So first, at aggregate level, we found out that leafy green consumers derive a positive utility from each of these 4 quality attributes we have: taste, freshness, nutrient level, and food safety. But more so from taste and freshness than nutrient levels and food safety. Also at aggregate level, if you can still see here the values, the willingness to pay for taste is about 3.5 times greater than the mean willingness to pay for nutrient level. This is how much more overall consumers value the taste over nutrient level. But like I said, we found a significant heterogeneity, and we defined the 3 classes. From that data, the conclusion we've got was that quality seekers, they were 55% of the data, so you can call it majority, perhaps a little bit thing, but it's more than half. They were quality seekers. And these quality seekers are the least price sensitive consumers. They show the highest willingness to pay values for all lettuce attributes, but value most taste and freshness. They show the highest value to all production methods as well, but it's ordered the highest willingness to pay for the greenhouse product, then field farmed, and then lastly, indoor agriculture. But nevertheless, they are willing to pay $3.8 for a 4.5 ounce lettuce, for 4.5 ounces of lettuce, let's put it this way. So these quality seekers derive a positive utility from knowing how their leafy greens are produced. The second class, the price conscious, about a quarter of these respondents, they were the most sensitive, most price sensitive. They somewhat value production methods, so the value they attribute to know where the lettuce is produced is not as high as the quality seekers, but not as low as the focus practical, so somewhat in between. They value more freshness than taste and food safety. And the willingness to pay for the leafy green quality attributes are smaller than the quality seekers because of the price sensitivity. And last but not the least, the focus practicals, about 18%. They are moderately price sensitive, but they came across as practical buyers because they were focused on fewer attributes, so they had negative willingness to pay, which means they don't derive any value from knowing where the leafy greens are produced, but they show willingness to pay for taste and freshness. So they value the quality attributes, but they're not interested to know where they come from. And they were least concerned between the classes with nutrient level and food safety. Now, I have been showing you the average willingness to pay, but I also want to talk about the distribution of this data, which brings another piece of interesting information here. When we look at the variance, we see how wide the distribution of these values are. So we notice a lack of consensus in terms of the preferences for production methods compared to other attributes or the quality attributes. So this wide distribution of values for the three production systems on the left of the picture kind of indicates that consumers have very distinguished opinions about these systems. In other words, the community has not formed a consensus, such as that for the quality attributes, you see how the distribution is much tighter. So everybody seems to agree, for example, on the value for food safety and nutrient value, nutrient level. But in terms of the production systems, we have this wide distribution. And also interestingly, the value attributed to field farming also seems to have been affected perhaps by the proposition of enhanced quality, environmentally free production, or other features of greenhouse and indoor agriculture that was brought up, right, with these innovation technologies. So it seems that consumers are less in agreement on what is the value of that should be attributed to the production systems. Another analysis we did was in terms of the demographics. So now when we look at demographics, we are back to the full sample and we look at the characteristics, right? So we can see from the size of the coefficients here that the willingness to pay for production methods varies significantly across generations, and that the willingness to pay for millennium, the willingness to pay in the cohort of millennials is the highest. Willingness to pay for indoor agriculture produced lettuce is highest, and on the other hand, the lowest for the baby boomers. In fact, if you look at the baby boomers numbers, they don't seem to derive any value from production systems. Again, they are possibly indifferent to where the produce comes from, but they do value freshness and taste. Now, both generations, X and millennials, still give a higher value to field farming over greenhouse grown, and lastly, indoor agriculture. And they also value nutrient levels slightly above food safety. Now, just a note here, Generation Z had a small sample in this survey, given their age. So we did not obtain statistically significant data from them. And I would say that if we look at the signals only, that perhaps Generation Z does not show yet the purchasing power and would be indifferent to production system, but we shouldn't look at it, that column, because we didn't get much significance, any significance for those values. So last, the other analysis, we look at the living area. So where are the indoor agriculture consumers, indoor agriculture lettuce consumers? They are mostly in the urban areas. So urban dwellers are willing to pay $4.80 for indoor agriculture produced lettuce, which is, again, smaller than greenhouse or field farming. But still, they show the positive willingness to pay and the highest willingness to pay for all production systems as an attribute. Respondents living in urban areas are also willing to pay more for the other for the quality attributes, like taste and freshness. Again, taste comes first, the most important or the most valued of all quality attributes. So overall, concluding what we've got from the willingness to pay analysis, we identified 3 distinctive leafy green consumer groups, which are the quality seekers, the price conscious, and the focus practicals. And more than half of these consumers, the quality seekers, seek quality, valuing most all quality attributes, and they are willing to pay the highest premium for indoor agriculture produce. But again, they are still willing to pay more for lettuce grown in greenhouse and field farming. The consensus between consumers is lower regarding their perceptions of production methods than the quality attributes. And we saw that taste and freshness are the most valued attributes, and nutrient was the least valued quality attribute in relation to the attributes that we presented here. It's important to remind. It doesn't mean that they don't find important, it's just in relation to the other attributes we presented here. And lastly, indoor agriculture produced leafy green consumers are likely to belong to the millennial cohort and live in urban areas. So that was our conclusion from the willingness to pay. Now I'm going to pass the baton back to Chris Peterson. And Chris, you're going to tell us a little bit, you're going to wrap up this discussion and combine the 2 conclusions, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, so do the consumer IA attributes, what they perceive or think about IA products, agree with their willingness to pay choices? And this is an attempt, a first attempt, to see how the 2 groups overlap. So the rows represent the 4 attitude segments, and the columns here represent the 3 willingness to pay segments. And so now I'm going to go sort of class by class here to talk about where are there overlaps and where aren't there as many overlaps as we might have hoped. So we're going to start with the IA engaged. They are overwhelmingly quality seekers. So their attitudes translate into willingness to pay very directly. And so we can feel very strongly about how we might market to this group. But in total, they're only 14% of the sample. Now that's still potentially a very large consumer base when you extrapolate to all of the leafy green consumers in our economy. So how to market to them is very straightforward. You really want to emphasize all of the high technology and all of the high quality that can be produced from IA. Moving up now to IA supportives. They are majority quality seekers, 55%. But many, but you also have a significant number that fall into being price conscious or even focused practicals when they move from their attitudes about IA to a simulation of the actual purchasing situation. Moving up the line then to IA accepting. IA accepting are the most price conscious segment by their attitudes. But again, when they're put in the simulated purchasing situation, the group itself evenly distributes across the three. So that among the accepting, there's about 1/3 who are really quality seekers, 1/3 that we would say are truly price conscious, and 1/3 that are more focused practicals, which suggest that in fact, they are an interesting cohort in terms of thinking that it is probably the issue of price, that in the absence of price, they probably would be clear quality seekers. And then the final group, the IA skeptical, and we sort of predicted that we thought the IA skeptical might actually be heavily weighted towards the focus practical category on the willingness to pay side. But again, just less than half are quality seekers. Roughly 1/3 here are price conscious, and only about 1/5 are focus practicals. Now, the ultimate question about do IA attitudes translate into willingness to pay, you can see that the answer isn't a simple yes or no. Both of these segmentations can be useful in guiding marketing strategy for individual firms. But it is clear that with 55% when faced with a willingness to pay decision problem, being quality seekers, quality is critical to the differentiation of IA produce from other forms of produce. But I also think it's clear from the analyses that the industry has to have a higher profile with their consumers if they're really going to get, that is, increasing consumer knowledge and use of your product to get the kind of revenue bump that you would really like to have from being able to control the environment, produce very high quality attributes, and then put a price tag on that will result in industry profitability.
Well, thank you so much, Chris and Simone. Wonderful presentation. I learned quite a bit.